Right now, the fight between Gojo and Sukuna is at its height. We see that right now Mahoraga has now entered the battle. And there is one thing that all of the good guys need to worry about. If Gojo loses, who will fight Sukuna next? Can Gojo weaken Sukuna enough, even if he dies, that some of the others can take Sukuna on after the battle? And if so, then who would be the best option to fight Sukuna? On one hand, we have Yuta Okkotsu, who has always been recognized as the strongest sorcerer behind Satoru Gojo. He is supposed to be the next Satoru Gojo, and even though Kenjaku does deny that Yuta can be the next Gojo, right now it is widely accepted that Yuta Okkotsu is the second strongest modern sorcerer behind Satoru Gojo. And there are a few controversial things within that statement about whether or not Yuta is actually second to Gojo or not, but we'll get into those later in the video. So on one hand we have Yuta, and on the other hand we have Kashimo. And you see, Kashimo even himself says that if Gojo loses, he himself wants to hop into the fight. Kashimo is a sorcerer from about 400 years ago who was basically the strongest guy around. We saw even in a flashback that he was looking for the strongest sorcerer. He ends up asking Kenjaku who is the strongest guy he knows so Kashimo himself can fight this guy. And Kenjaku tells him, well, the strongest sorcerer I know is Sukuna. And so this is why Kashimo actively wants to fight Sukuna. We see that even when he first appears in the Culling games, he is looking for Sukuna so he can fight and kill him. You see, Kashimo got into a fight with one of the strongest guys in the series, Hikari, and even though he lost, he displayed great strength and abilities, and he even went throughout this entire fight with Hikari without using his curse technique, which is one of the reasons that the entire JJK fandom is wondering what he has up his sleeve and if it is actually strong enough to damage Sukuna or not. Because now Kashimo is seeing Sukuna fight for the first time. He's seeing firsthand how strong Sukuna is, because remember, Kashimo isn't from that era. And even seeing this strength in front of him, Kashimo cannot wait for the smoke. So with this in mind, we have to make a decision. Who would be the better option to fight Sukuna in case he wins against Gojo? Would it be Yuta Okkotsu, the second strongest sorcerer in the modern era, or would it be a demon from 400 years ago, Hajime Kashimo? We will be getting into everything that these two sorcerers have to bring to the table and why it wouldn't be useful in a fight against Sukuna, given the ability matchup that both of these sorcerers have with him. So with that being said, let's get into the video. And I think it's fair that we start off with Yuta Okkotsu since he is basically the golden boy of Jujutsu Kaisen. He is the runner-up. He's supposed to be the second strongest sorcerer, so narratively speaking, he should be the next up to fight if Gojo was to fall, right? Well, let's look at Yuta's abilities and see how they match up in a fight with Sukuna. So first let's start off with what Yuta is widely known for, and that is his large and immense amount of curse energy. Multiple times throughout the series, it's stated that his curse energy is endless or boundless, but there's just one problem with that when it comes to fighting Sukuna. We see that throughout Sukuna's fight with Gojo, Yuta actually says that Sukuna has about double the amount of curse energy that he does. And this is actually pretty terrifying, you know, since the fact that Yuta was supposed to have the most curse energy in the entire series, his curse energy was stated to be boundless. How in the world can there be somebody with twice the amount of curse energy than he has? But it does become tricky once you realize that Sukuna is having a hard-fought battle with Gojo, where they have opened up their domain expansions multiple times, so we don't know how much curse energy Sukuna has been using and whether or not his amount is still twice more than Yuta's, but curse energy isn't all there is to a battle anyways. We see that Yuta, with his copy curse technique, still has techniques that he has copied in the past that would be useful in a fight against Sukuna. So first, let's look at the techniques that Yuta has, and let's cross off some of the worst ones first that I don't think would be that useful. And one of the ones that I don't think would be that useful is curse speech. You know, it's easy to defend against curse speech, especially at a high level. It's shown that all you have to do is just cover your ears, whether that be with your hands or curse energy, and Sukuna definitely would be able to do this. So I don't think that curse speech would be that effective against Sukuna, and neither would Drew Shikigami, because we see that although they are annoying against Uro, they don't seem to do that much damage at all, as Uro can just quickly recover and keep fighting. If anything, these Shikigami just seem more like Pest, So I don't think that the Shikigami or Curse Speech would be big factors in a fight against Sukuna. But one of the techniques that he already has copied that I do think would be useful is the sky manipulation technique that he got off of Uro. We see that Uro can actually send Yuta flying backwards multiple times. Even though Uro herself is weaker than Yuta, being able to manipulate the sky and create a shockwave is good enough for dealing damage and sending an opponent flying backwards. We also see that sky manipulation is good for curving attacks in a different direction, as at the end of the fight with Ryu actually shoots a granite blast at Yuta and Yuta curves it to the sky, and as it's coming down, Yuta also uses sky manipulation to hit Ryu in the stomach, which makes Ryu cough up blood. So I do think that sky manipulation could be used in multiple ways in a fight with Sukuna, where it would prove to be helpful. But the most useful tool of all would be his base technique, which is being able to copy others' curse techniques. Now, this would get a bit tricky, because if Yuta can match the condition to get the 10 shadows or shrine techniques, then he would basically be fighting Sukuna with his own techniques. And this gets a bit tricky when you think about if you can actually copy the 10 shadows technique, because it seems like when you have the 10 shadows, these shadows belong to you, and a shadow that you can summon these creatures out of. Like we see that Megami summons the rabbits out of his shadow. He summons Maharaga out of his shadows that he has access to. If Yuta was to copy the 10 shadows, then I guess he would gain access to a shadow as well. But the tricky part comes in, would he have access to his own Maharaga? If it truly does mean that Yuta can copy any technique that he comes across, then, well, sure, he would be able to have his own Maharaga on the battlefield as well, because he would have the 10 shadows technique, which would mean he has access to all 10 of the shadows. But the problem with this is we don't actually know the condition for Yuta to even copy somebody's curse technique. Yes, we see in the fight with Uro that after Rika bites Uro's already torn off arm, that Yuta gains access to Uro's sky manipulation. But we don't even know if this is the only way to copy somebody's curse technique. We don't know if it has something to do with blood or a curse energy sort of transference from Rika to the opponent. But all we do know is that the only time we've seen this condition met is that it was by biting Uro's arm. But the reason I don't think the condition is brutal is biting an arm completely off is because we know that in Volume 0, Yuta gained Curse Speech from Inumaki. And I don't personally think Yuta would have Rika bite Inumaki's arm completely off just so he could get Curse Speech. Now, it is possible that that happened. You know, Yuta can heal people, so maybe he did have Rika bite Inumaki's arm off just so he could heal it after. But either way, the point is we don't know this condition that is met in order to copy curse techniques. But we do know that some sort of curse energy or blood transfer needs to happen with Rika and an opponent in a fight in order for Yuta to copy their curse technique. And here are the big problems that I think Yuta would face in a fight with Sukuna. Well, to say that he would even meet the condition to copy curse techniques would just be baseless. You know, since we don't know exactly what the condition is, and the only time we saw it happen, it was rather difficult, you know, biting an arm that was already torn off. Saying that this would happen in a fight with Sukuna just wouldn't fly. So we have to say that Yuta would most likely end up fighting with his techniques that he already has. And the problem with this is his curse techniques are nowhere near to the par as Sukuna's are currently. And before I even say why, I do just want to say that, say if by some miracle Yuta can use the 10 shadows, his Maharaga would just lose because, well, Sukuna can just destroy Yuta's Maharaga with the flame arrow the same way that Sukuna destroyed Maharaga in the past. So even if Yuta by some miracle did get Maharaga out on the battlefield for himself, he would just lose anyways. So we have to see how Yuta would do in a matchup with his own abilities versus Sukuna's. And one big problem that Yuta would have in a fight is his speed. Well, we know that Yuta was around the same level in speed as Ryu was in their fight, and Ryu got utterly blitzed by a 15-finger level Sukuna, because Sukuna just recently got the rest of his fingers and ate the head, so he is now 20 fingers level in strength. But even back then, when Ryu did fight against Sukuna, Sukuna only had 15 fingers worth of curse energy, and he got blitzed. So the question becomes, is it fair to say that since a weaker Sukuna was able to blitz Ryu, does this mean that a 20-finger Sukuna would be able to blitz Yuta? And my answer is, well, not exactly, and I'll explain why. It is a widely held belief that Ryu was actually nerfed in his matchup with Sukuna. We know that Sukuna has this property to his curse energy that literally makes the opponent afraid to move. We see that back in Shibuya, Jogo and the two girls say that Sukuna's curse energy is overwhelmingly evil and they're afraid that any move means their deaths. And I think that this is what we're seeing happens against Ryu. We see that he is quite literally shook. It seems like he is moving very rigidly and he is super scared as we see sweat rolling down his face. Ryu looks scared to move, much even less fight, so I don't think that Ryu was able to move at his full speed here in his matchup with 15 Finger Sukuna. And with what else we learned later, we also know that it wouldn't really make sense if 15 Finger Sukuna would be fast enough to just blitz and kill Yuta like he did Ryu, and I'll go ahead and explain why. Maki was able to keep up with a 15 Finger Sukuna in terms of speed, and I know that some people's initial reactions to this is, well, Sukuna was actually nerfed in his fight with Maki and Yuji, so that doesn't count. But as many translators on Twitter have gone over this, when Sukuna says that his curse energy output has been lowered, this is only in reference to curse energy output and curse techniques, and it's not actually in reference to movement, as Sukuna also just flat out says that his movement is fine. So the translators have already covered the fact that even though he says that his curse energy output is hindered, it is only in reference to techniques, and Sukuna himself says that his movement is fine. So with all of this in mind, we have no reason to believe that Sukuna's movement is hindered in any way. So since Maki can keep up with 15 finger level Sukuna in speed, and we also know that Yuta, Maki, and Hikari are labeled as the 3 heavy hitters for the Jujutsu Society, as well as this statement saying that Yuta is the front runner, the leader of this heavy hitters group, then I don't think that we can just say because Ryu was blitzed by 15 Finger Sukuna that the same would happen to Yuta. Now, Maki, Yuta, and Hikari all being labeled as the heavy hitters implies that they are all around the same level in power, which just makes sense narratively as well. And even though Sukuna wasn't able to use curse techniques to damage Maki and Yuji in the fight with them, Maki also has no curse techniques either. She is a straight up physical fighter. So in that fight with Sukuna, when it came to their altercations, it was just sort of straight up hands. But the difference with a fight with Yuta is that Sukuna would be able to use curse techniques this time, and Sukuna would also be having to deal with curse techniques being thrown at him by Yuta. So here is the big problem. How weak will Sukuna be after the fight with Gojo if he wins? If Gojo can weaken Sukuna to about 15 fingers level of power or even lower, then the fight with Yuta becomes debatable. But if Sukuna stays higher than 15 levels of power, then I think that his speed would be too great for Yuta to deal with, and he would end up just cutting Yuta's face in 3 pieces like he did with Ryu. But even if Gojo does weaken Sukuna to about 15 fingers level of power, I still think that the curse technique matchup is too bad for Yuta. Slashes just outright beat everything that he has, as well as the 10 Shadows technique and Maharaga. Like I said earlier, curse speech wouldn't work, and Drew Shikigami would be useless as well. The best technique that Yuta would have is the Sky Manipulation, and even that isn't used to deal big damage, is more so used to curve things out of the way and even sort of conceal yourself in some ways, but he wouldn't be using Sky Manipulation as a sort of finisher move against Sukuna to take him out. The best thing that Yuta would have to deal damage is a big blast from Rika, and the problem with this is, well, Maharaga would probably just take Rika out. I've done a video on Rika versus Maharaga before, and it is a pretty good video if you want to know the long explanation for why I think Maharaga just dogs Rika. So with Rika being counteracted and inferior curse techniques against Sukuna's curse techniques, even if Sukuna was weakened to around Yuta's level in power, he would still just outright lose to Sukuna because of their matchup style. The only chance I see Yuta in winning a fight against Sukuna is if Gojo weakens him even further below like 15 level, maybe around like 10, 12 finger level, then Yuta would probably get a win over Sukuna. But if Sukuna and Yuta were around the same level in power, due to the curse technique type matchup, I think that Yuta would just simply lose. So with all of that being said, let's get into why I think Kashimo would be the far better opponent in a matchup with Sukuna. Now, yes, I do think that both of these sorcerers would lose if Sukuna was at 100% of his power, but like in the previous matchup with Yuta, if Sukuna is around 15 fingers level in power when he fights against Kashimo, then I think that we see a much better matchup out of Kashimo. One thing we know is that Hikari is stated by Yuta to be stronger than he is when he is on a roll. And Hikari being on a roll just means Akari in his jackpot state, and in this state we know that Hikari gains an infinite amount of curse energy, as well as automatic reverse curse technique that runs around his body for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Now, we know that Kashimo was able to fight on a level with Hikari, and you could even argue that Kashimo is actually even a bit stronger than Hikari in their fight. The reason for this comes from the fact that Kashimo actually landed 2 blows that should have been lethal, but the simple fact that Hikari has automatic reverse curse technique that just instantly regenerates any limb that he loses is the main reason why Hikari ended up winning the fight. Now, you can't blame Hikari for having this ability. You know, after all, it is sorcerer's duties to use what they have in order to win a fight. But the main comparison here is that in terms of just power and speed and strength, Hikari is around the same level as Kashimo, but Kashimo was able to take one of Hikari's arms off at the beginning of the fight, and then we also see that later on he was able to put a chunk in Hikari's left side that would have ended up killing him had he not hit a jackpot the moment after. Now, the reason this is so important is because against any other opponent, they have to get back and sort of heal themselves and take a bit of time, which is what we see actually happens when Sukuna fights against Gojo. We see that Sukuna needs time to heal himself, which is why he was late to the domain clash and ended up losing it, is because he was trying to heal his own body. This sort of hesitation or this sort of moment where you have to heal yourself is what every other sorcerer would have to deal with in a fight against Kashimo if he lands a hit on them with a lightning bolt. Now, one thing about this lightning bolt is that nobody is dodging it. You know, we see in a TCB translation that it says that Kashimo uses the backstroke of lightning to hit the opponent. And just so you know, the backstroke of lightning moves at 1/3 the speed of light. You see, lightning itself isn't that fast in comparison to the speed of light, as the speed of light is about 1,000 times faster than the speed of lightning. But when it comes to the backstroke of lightning, the speed of light is only 3 times faster than the backstroke of lightning, which is why every time that Kashimo uses his lightning attack, Hikari can't dodge it. It is much faster than Hikari and Kashimo are moving themselves. So if Kashimo was able to build up a charge in his staff, then it would undoubtedly hit a Sukuna that is around 15 fingers level in strength and end up taking whatever side or limb or part of Sukuna that Kashimo decides to hit. And there is one thing that we also have to look at here. We don't even know what Kashimo's curse technique is. The entire time that he fought against Akari, he wasn't even using his curse technique. But whatever Kashimo's hidden technique is, he is confident that he would be useful in winning a fight against Sukuna. Another thing that we have to look at with this lightning bolt that Kashimo uses multiple times against Akari is that he has to actually build up the charge. It doesn't just happen instantly. And we see that Kashimo actually builds up this charge throughout the physical fight. Now, before I say this next part, I do want to emphasize again that this is if Kashimo fought a Sukuna that was around a 15 finger level, as we do have to account for Sukuna being weakened after the fight with Gojo, and if he was at full power it would just be a mop, and if he was only at about like 10 fingers level, then I think that both Yuta and Kashimo would just pack Sukuna up pretty easily. So I think that it would just be fitting to compare Sukuna if he was weakened to about a 15 finger level in their fight with Yuta and Kashimo. So now that I've said that disclaimer again, I do just want to say that Kashimo wouldn't have a problem with speed in a fight against this Sukuna. You see, Mahoraga isn't that physically fast. We see that even when Sukuna himself is at about 15 fingers level, speed isn't the problem. He can dash around Mahoraga and hit him. So I don't think that Mahoraga would just be beating Kashimo up. I think that Kashimo would just be dashing around and trying to hit Sukuna himself. And that's if Sukuna even uses Mahoraga in a fight against Kashimo. You know, if he just sticks with the Divine Dogs and the other 10 shadows, I think that Kashimo would actually be able to take these shadows out. I think the only problem would come in the fact that Sukuna can just heal with reverse curse technique even if he does take a lethal blow with a lightning attack, and even if it comes down to it, Sukuna does have a domain expansion at the end of the day, and we don't even know if Kashimo has a domain expansion. You know, we do know that he does have a hollow wicker basket, but to say that it would withstand Sukuna's domain expansion is just iffy. So I'll say this, if Sukuna does use a domain expansion, then I think that he actually just beats Kashimo pretty easily. But the parts where I think it gets closer is if Sukuna decides to not use a domain expansion at first and they just fight with straight up hands, which I will say Sukuna does prefer to do. If you look at all of Sukuna's past fights, he seems to prefer to throw hands until it comes time to open a domain expansion. We see in the fight with Jogo, the fight with Mahoraga, Yorozu, and even Gojo, he doesn't use domain expansion unless it's necessary. We see that he prefers to throw hands and curse techniques if he can. So since I think that Kashimo can definitely keep up in speed, or if even maybe be faster because of the Maki line of scaling that I gave before with the whole heavy hitters thing, then I think that Kashimo would probably be able to build up charge to release at least one of his lightning strikes against Sukuna. And the reason I'm only saying maybe one instead of multiple like we saw in a fight with Akari is that, well, Sukuna has his shrine techniques as well as the 10 shadows. You know, I don't think that any of the 10 shadows are fast enough to actually catch up or even hurt Kashimo. The only thing Sukuna has that I think would be able to do a lot of damage is the shrine techniques that he has. I think that since they would be around the same level in speed, if Sukuna were to land slashes, it would do a bunch of damage, but the same would go for if Kashimo was able to land a lightning strike. The only reason that I would give the advantage to Sukuna is because, well, he doesn't need to build up his slashes. We see that he can just use them because they are his base curse technique, and he uses them to cut Ryu's head in 3 pieces. So since the slashes and the lightning are both devastating, for the simple fact that the lightning needs a build up but the slashes don't, I would give the advantage to Sukuna. And that's the big problem that Yuta would have in that matchup, which is why I think Kashimo would be a better opponent, is that Yuta doesn't have that big devastating attack. And even though I just said I would give the advantage to Sukuna when it comes to lightning versus the slashes, because Sukuna and Kashimo would probably have relative speed, one thing that Kashimo has is this hidden technique that we don't know about. We don't know how strong it is, but for the simple fact that he is confident that it would be helpful in a fight with Sukuna, combined with the fact that curse techniques are strong within themselves, we see that sorcerers fight with their curse technique. It is what they are. And the simple fact that Kashimo is able to do so much damage without even using his curse technique, it means a testament to how strong it actually is. And also, since we know that he can only use it once, in classic anime style, it's probably a big ball of energy or something that drains all of the electricity and he'll never be able to use it again, meaning that for a short moment he probably will have some overwhelming power. And if this is the case, then I think that Kashimo undoubtedly has the best chance out of everybody watching the fight to actually deal damage and possibly even beat Sukuna. So if I had to choose between Yuta or Kashimo to go up and fight Sukuna right after the fight with Gojo, I would choose Kashimo. And with that being said, I want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video, and if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.